All right, very good. We're here. We're going to read Selma Lagerlöf's book, The Saga of Gösta Berling. And now we've come to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is called The Old Conveyances, right? Selma is a tough old nut and she can spin a yarn. So are you ready? The Old Conveyances. Friends, children of humankind, if you should find yourselves reading this at night, whether sitting or lying down, just as I am writing this during the silent hours, then you must not heave a sigh of relief here and think that the good gentlemen cavaliers of Akeby were allowed an undisturbed sleep after they had come home with Marianne and found her a good bed in the best guest room next to the large parlor. They did go to bed, and they did fall asleep, but it was not their lot to sleep in peace and quiet until midday, as it might perhaps have been mine or yours, dear readers, if we had been awake until 4 and our limbs were aching with fatigue. After all, it must not be forgotten that at this time the old majoress was wandering around the countryside with her beggar's pouch and a walking stick, and that it was never her way, when she had any important business, to show any regard for the comfort of a tired out sinner. Now she was even less inclined to do so, as she had decided to drive the cavaliers out from Akeby that very night. Gone was the time when she sat in splendor at Akeby, sowing joy across the earth, the way God sows stars across the heavens. And while she was wandering homeless around the countryside, the great estate's power and honor was left to be tended by the cavaliers, like the wind tends the ashes, like the spring sun tends the snowdrift. It sometimes happened that 6 or 8 of the cavaliers would drive out on a long sleigh with a team and sleigh bells and braided reins. If they encountered the majoress as she wandered like a beggar, they did not lower their eyes. The boisterous group would raise clenched fists towards her. Oh, there's some thanks for you. With a sudden turn of the sleigh, she would be forced up into the roadside snowdrift, and Major Fook, the bear killer, always took the opportunity to spit 3 times and remove any evil effects of this encounter with the hag. They had no compassion for her. To them, she was as ugly as a witch as she walked along the road. If an accident had befallen her, they would not have grieved any more than someone who, firing a loaded shotgun on Easter Eve, grieves over striking a troll hag flying past. Persecuting the majoress was a matter of salvation to them, the poor cavaliers. People have often been cruel and tormented one another with great severity when they have feared for their souls. When, far into the night, the cavaliers staggered from the drinking tables over to the windows to see if the night was calm and starlit, they often noticed a dark shadow gliding across the yard, and they understood that the majoress had come home to see her beloved home. Then the cavalier's wing was shaken by the old sinner's scornful laughter, and jeers flew down to her through the open windows. You see, these guys believe that the majoress had made a deal with the devil to send one of them, that she was going to send the devil a soul each year. One of the cavaliers, she was out to kill one cavalier each year to send their soul to the devil. And in exchange for this, she got some kind of business success with the iron industry or something like that, right? And so they found this out from Sintram, and then they turned on her and they drove her out and they took over the business, right? The pensioners took over. In truth, lack of feeling and arrogance began to encroach upon the hearts of the cavaliers. Lack of feeling and arrogance began to encroach upon the hearts of the cavaliers. Sintram had implanted hatred in them. Their souls would not have been in greater danger if the majoress had remained at Akeby. More die in flight than during battle. The majoress did not feel overly angry with these cavaliers. If the power had been hers, she would have punished them with a birch rod like naughty boys, and afterward given them back her kindliness and favor. But now she feared for the beloved estate, which was left to be cared for by the cavaliers, the way the wolves watch the sheep, the way the cranes watch the spring grain. There must be many who have suffered the same sorrow. She is not the only one who has seen destruction ravage a beloved home and knows what it feels like when well-tended farms go into decline. They have seen their childhood home gaze at them like a wounded animal. Many feel like miscreants when they see the trees there wither away under moss and the sanded pathways covered by tufts of grass. They want to throw themselves on their knees on those fields, which in times past gloried in rich harvests, and beg them not to blame them for the shame that has befallen them. And they turn away from the poor old horses, let someone bolder look them in the eye, and they dare not stand at the gate and see the cattle coming home from pasture. No spot on the earth is as odious to enter as a dilapidated home. Oh, I beg you, all of you who tend fields and meadows and parks and beloved joy-bringing flower gardens, tend them well. Tend them in love, in labor. It is not good that nature grieves for people. As I think about what this proud Achebe must suffer under the governance of the cavaliers, then I wish that the majoress's attack had achieved its goal and that Achebe had been taken from the cavaliers. It was not her intention to come back to power herself. She had but one goal, to free her home from these lunatics, these grasshoppers, these wild robbers, after whose rampaging no grass would grow. While she went begging around the countryside, living off alms, she constantly had to think of her mother, and the thought took firm hold in her heart that there would be no respite for her until her mother lifted the curse from her shoulders. No one had yet reported the old woman's death, so she must still be alive up there at the ironworks in the Elvdal forests. 90 years of age, she still lived a life of unremitting labor, watching over milk pans in summer, over charcoal stacks in winter, working until her death, longing for the day when she would have completed her life's calling. And the majoress, that's the daughter of the old woman put a curse on her. The majoress thought that the old woman must have had to live so long in order to be able to lift the curse from her existence. A mother who had called down such misery on her child would not be allowed to die. Oh, the majoress wanted to go to the old woman so that they both might find peace. She wanted to wander up through the dark forests, beside the long river to her childhood home. Until then, she would find no peace. There were many who in those days offered her warm homes and gifts of faithful friendship, but she remained nowhere. Bitter and angry, she went from farm to farm, and she was oppressed by the curse. She wanted to wander up to her mother, but first she wanted to care for her beloved estate. She did not want to go and leave it in the hands of irresponsible spendthrifts, of useless drinking champions, of negligent embezzlers of God's gifts. So should she leave only to return and find her inheritance ravaged, her hammers silent, her horses emaciated, her servants stolen away? Oh no, once again she would rise up in her power and drive away the cavaliers. She well understood that her husband gleefully saw that her inheritance was being embezzled. But she knew him well enough to know that if only she were to drive away his grasshoppers, he would be too sluggish to acquire new ones. If the cavaliers were removed, then her old foreman and inspector could manage the activities of Achebe in the accustomed ways. And so for many nights, her dark shadow had glided along the dark paths of the ironworks. She had sneaked in and out of the crofters' cottages. She had whispered with the miller and the mill hands in the lower floor of the large mill. She had conferred with the smiths in the dark, cold shed. And they had all sworn to help her. The honor and power of the great ironworks would no longer be left to be tended by negligent cavaliers. The way the wind tends the ashes, the way the wolf tends the herd of sheep. And on this night, when the merry gentlemen had danced, played, and drunk until they had sunk down into their beds in dead, tired slumber, on this night they had to leave. She has let them exult, the carefree ones. She has been sitting in the smithy in bitter expectation, biding her time for the end of the ball. She has waited even longer for the cavaliers to come back again from their nocturnal journey. She has been sitting in silent expectancy until she was told that the last candle flame was extinguished in the windows of the cavalier's wing, and the great estate was sleeping. Then she got up and went out. The majoress ordered all of the people of the estate to gather by the cavalier's wing. She herself went up ahead to the courtyard. There she went up to the main building, knocked, and was admitted. The Broby minister's young daughter, who she had brought up to be a capable servant. You remember that young daughter who was poor and bitter because she had to sneak out of the house to go get the grain milled to make flour in order to make bread to feed the family. She was like 9 years old and she snuck out of the house to grind the flour. And then on the way back home, she asked Gösta Berling for help. And did he help her? No, he sold the grain and he sold the flour sack and he sold her sled for money so he could drink. Yeah, it was a bitter story. And so then the majoress of Ekeby came in and saved the situation because she could buy back the flour sack and she could buy back the sled. She could save the little girl whose father was a minister but no good at being a father. And so the majoress decided to raise the girl herself. But then at the same time, she told Gösta Berling, I'm only going to save that girl if you come and live with me as one of my pensioners together with the cavaliers. And so she saved two people at the same time on that night, right? The little girl and Gösta Berling. So now that girl is still at the estate and is like a servant girl, you know, to the majoress of Ekeby. Okay, so the Broby minister's young daughter, whom she had brought up to be a very capable servant, met her. My lady is so warmly welcome, the servant said, kissing her hand. Blow out the candle, said the majoress. You know, the majoress, she's a tough customer. She can work the iron mills and keep track of all the workers. So don't mess with the majoress. Blow out the candle, said the majoress. Do you think I can't find my way here without a light? And then she began her circuit through the silent house. She went from the cellar to the attic and said farewell. With stealthy steps, she passed from room to room. The majoress was conversing with her memories. The servant neither sighed nor sobbed, but tear upon tear flowed unchecked from her eyes as she followed her mistress. The majoress had her open the linen cabinet and the silver cabinet, and stroked the fine damask tablecloths and stout silver tankards with her hand. She caressed the massive pile of down bolsters up in the linen closet. All the implements, looms, spinning wheels, and spindles, she had to feel them all. She stuck her hand probingly down into the spice barrel and felt the rows of tallow candles hanging from rods in the ceiling. The candles are dry now, she said. They can be taken down and put away. She was in the cellar, carefully lifting the beverage barrels and feeling the rows of wine bottles. She was in the pantry and the kitchen, touching everything, examining everything. She reached out her hand and said farewell to everything in her house. What the heck is she going to do? Finally, she went into the living quarters. In the dining hall, she felt the top of the large drop leaf table. Many have eaten their fill at this table, she said. As she proceeded through all the rooms, she found the long, broad sofas in their places. She laid her hand on the cool surfaces of the marble tables, which, borne up by gilded griffins, supported mirrors with a frieze of dancing goddesses. This is a wealthy house, she said. A splendid man he was, who gave me all this to preside over. You know, the majoress at Akeby, she had an affair with a rich man, and all of these things belonged to the rich man, right? So her husband owes her nothing because she was cheating on him. And that's also why she's in trouble right now, is because she was having an affair, but she truly loved this guy. Yeah. But he gave her nice things. In the parlor, where the dance had just whirled, the stiff-backed armchairs were already standing rigidly, ordered along the walls. She went over to the clavier, the piano, and very slowly struck a note. Nor have joy and merriment been lacking here in my time either, she said. The majoress also went into the guest room next to the parlor. It was coal black in there. The majoress fumbled around with her hand, ending up right in her servant's face. Are you crying? She said, for she felt her hand wet from tears. The young girl burst into sobs. My lady, she cried, my lady, they will destroy everything. Why does my lady leave us and let the cavaliers devastate our house? Then the majoress pulled on the curtain tie and pointed out at the yard. Am I the one who taught you to cry and complain? She exclaimed. Look outside, the yard is full of people. Tomorrow there will no longer be a single cavalier at Akeby. Then will my lady come back again? Asked the servant. My time is not yet come, said the majoress. The highway is my home and the haystack my bed, but you will tend Akeby for me, girl, while I am away. And they went on. Neither of them knew or realized that Marianne was sleeping in this very room, nor was she asleep. She was wide awake, heard everything, and understood everything. She had been lying there on the bed, composing a hymn of love. You splendid man who has raised me above myself, she said. I was in bottomless misery, and you have transformed it into a paradise. On the iron handle of the closed doorway, my hands were caught and torn. On the doorstep of my home, my tears were frozen into pearls of ice. The chill of anger turned my heart to ice when I heard the blows on my mother's back. I wanted to sleep away my anger in the cold snowdrift, but you have come. O love, you child of fire, you have come to someone frozen through from much cold. If I compare my misery to the splendor I have thereby won, it seems to me nothing. I am freed from all bonds. I have no father, no mother, and no home. People will believe everything bad about me and turn away from me. Well, so has it pleased you, O love, for why should I stand higher than my beloved? Hand in hand, we will travel out into the world. Gösta Berling's bride is poor. He found her in the snowdrift. So let us make a nest together, not in high halls, but in a crofter's cottage at the forest edge. I will help him to watch the charcoal pile. I will help him to set snares for grouse and hares. I will cook his food and mend his clothes. Oh, my beloved, I will miss you and grieve while I sit alone at the forest edge and await you. Do you believe it? I will, but not for days of riches, simply for you. Simply for you will I peer and long for your footsteps on the forest path, for your happy song as you come with your axe on your back. Oh, my beloved, as long as my life continues, I could sit and wait for you. Thus Marianne had been lying there, composing hymns to the heart's all-governing God, and had not shut her eyes in sleep at all when the majoress had come in. When she was gone, Marianne got up and put on her clothes. Once again, she must clothe herself in the black velvet dress and the thin ball shoes. She wrapped the bed cover around her like a shawl, and once again hurried out into the dreadful night. Calm, starlit, and biting cold, the February night still rested over the earth. It was as if it were never come to an end. And the darkness and the cold that spread this long night lasted for a long time on the earth, long after the sun had come up, long after the drifts through which the lovely Marianne had walked had turned to water. Marianne hurried away from Achebe to get help. She could not let the men who had lifted her out of the drift and opened their hearts and home. She could not let these men be driven away. She would go down to her, to Major Samzelius, the husband of the majoress. Marianne was in a hurry. She could not be back for at least an hour. When the majoress said farewell to her home, after she had said farewell to her home, she went out into the yard where the people awaited her, and the battle for the cavalier's wing began. The majoress positions the people round about the high, narrow building, whose upper story is the cavalier's renowned home. In the large room up there, with the lime plastered walls, the red painted chests, and the large drop leaf table where the kille cards swim in spilled liquor, where the broad beds are covered by yellow checked bed curtains, there the cavaliers are sleeping. Oh, those carefree men. And in the stable before a full stall, the cavaliers' horses are sleeping and dream of the journeys of their youth. Sweet it is in the days of rest to dream of youth's wild deeds, of trips to market, when for nights and days they must stay outside under the open sky, of races home from the Christmas morning service, of test driving before a horse trade, when drunken gentlemen, brandishing the reins, stretching out of the carriage across their backs and bellowed swear words in their ears. Sweet it is to dream, knowing they will never again leave the filled mangers, the warm stalls of Achebe. Oh, those carefree ones. In a shabby old wagon shed, to which broken down coaches and superannuated sleighs are brought, there is a marvelous collection of old conveyances. There are rack wagons painted green and spindle-sided wagons of red and yellow. There stands the first carriole ever seen in Wermland, won by Beerenkreutz as war bounty in 1814. There are all imaginable types of one-horse carriages, chaises with rocking springs, and peculiar instruments of torture, with the seat resting on wooden springs. Very strange. There is everything, the murderous coffee burners and Halvwanninger, and gigs celebrated in song in the days of the highways. And there was the long sleigh that holds 12 cavaliers, and cold cousin Christopher's covered sleigh, and Erneklau's old family sleigh with the moth-eaten bear hide and a worn coat of arms on the cover, as well as the racing sleighs, an infinity of racing sleighs. Many are the cavaliers who have lived and died at Achebe. Their names are forgotten on earth, and they no longer have a place in people's hearts, but the majoress has stored away the vehicles in which they came to the estate. She has assembled them all in the old wagon shed, and in there they stand and slumber and let the dust fall thick, thick upon them. Nails and spikes loosen their hold in the rotting timbers. The paint falls off in long flakes. The stuffing in the cushions and pads pokes out of holes that moths have produced. Let us rest. Let us fall apart, say the old conveyances. We have shaken long enough on the roads. We have drawn quite enough moisture into us during rain showers. Let us rest. It was long ago that we drove off with the young gentlemen to their first ball. It was long ago that we drove out, newly painted and shining, on the sleighing party's sweet adventures. Long ago we brought the merry heroes down to the fields of Trosnes on muddy spring roads. Most of them are sleeping. The last and the best of them never intended to leave Ekeby, never again. And so the leather in the carriage apron is cracking. The wheel rings loosen, spokes and hubs rot. The old vehicles do not care to live. They want to die. The dust already lies over them like a funeral pall, and under its cover they let old age have its way with them. In irrepressible idleness, they stand there and decay. No one touches them, and still they fall to pieces. Once a year, the wagon shed is opened. In the event a new comrade has arrived who wants to settle down in earnest at Ekeby, and as soon as the doors are closed, tiredness, sleep, decay, the weakness of old age settle over this one as well. Rats and rodents and moths and death watch beetles, and you name it, the predators throw themselves upon it, and it rusts and rots in dreamless, delightful disquiet. But now, in the February night, the majoress orders the door opened to the wagon shed. And with lanterns and torches, she has the vehicles picked out that belong to Ekeby's current cavaliers. Beerenkreuz's old carriole, and Erneklau's coat of arms adorned carriage, and the narrow covered sleigh that has protected cousin Christopher. She doesn't care whether these are vehicles for summer or winter. She simply sees to it that each one of them, she simply sees to it that each of them will get his own. And in the stable, they are now being wakened, all the old cavalier horses who were just dreaming before full mangers. Dream will become reality, you carefree ones. Once again, you will endure the steep hills and musty hay in the sheds of the inns and the spiked whips of intoxicated horse traders, and furious races on glassy ice so slippery that you tremble to set foot on it. Now they are in their proper form, these old vehicles, when the small gray fjord horses are set in front of a tall ghost-like chase, or when the high-legged bony riding horses are harnessed to low racing sleighs. The old animals whinny and snort as the bit is set in their toothless mouths. The old conveyances creak and squeak, pitiful brittleness, which ought to have been allowed to sleep in peace until the end of time, is now dragged out for inspection. Stiff hock joints, limping forelegs, spavin and strangles come to light. I don't know that word, S-P-A-V-I-N, spaven. Spaven and strangles come to light. We're going to look that one up. We'll see what it means. The stable hands, however, managed to get the draft animals harvest. My tea, good black tea. The stable hands, however, managed to get the draft animals harnessed to the vehicles. Then they go over and ask the majoress in which vehicle Gösta Berling should ride. For as everyone knows, he came to Ekeby riding in the majoress's coal cart. Harness Don Juan to our best racing sleigh, says the majoress, and spread out the bearskin with the silver claws across it. And when the stable hand grumbles, she continues, there is not a horse in my stable I would not give to be rid of that fellow. Don't forget it. So now the vehicles are awake and the horses likewise, but the cavaliers are still sleeping. And don't piss off the majoress. Now it is their turn. The horses, it is their turn to be ushered out into the winter night. But it is a more dangerous deed to attack them in their beds than to usher out the stiff-legged horses and rickety old conveyances. Now it's the cavaliers' turn to be turned out into the winter night, but it is a more dangerous deed to attack them in their beds than to usher out the stiff-legged horses and rickety old conveyances. They are bold, strong, dreadful men, hardened by 100 adventures. They are ready to defend themselves to the death. It is no easy matter to usher them out of their beds against their will and down to the vehicles that are to carry them away. So the majoress sets fire to a haystack standing so close to the yard that the flames must shine into the cavaliers where they are sleeping. The haystack is mine. All of Aceby is mine, she says. And when the stack is all ablaze, she calls out, "Wake them now." But the cavaliers are sleeping within well-closed doors. The entire crowd of people outside starts shouting the dreadful, frightening words. "A fire has broken out! Fire!" But the cavaliers sleep. The master smith's heavy sledge thunders against the entryway, but the cavaliers sleep. A hard-packed snowball breaks the window and flies into the room, bouncing against the bed curtain, but the cavaliers sleep. They are dreaming that a beautiful girl is throwing a handkerchief toward them. They dream about applause behind a lowered curtain. They dream of merry laughter and the deafening din of midnight banquets. They've just had that wonderful ball. They have bowed, danced, played music, acted, and sung. They are heavy with wine, emptied of energy, and are sleeping a sleep as deep as death. This blessed sleep is about to save them. The people start to think that this calm conceals a danger. What if this means that the cavaliers are already out getting help? What if this means that they stand ready with fingers on the trigger, on guard behind the window or the door, ready to fall on the first one who intrudes? These men are shrewd, aggressive. Their silence must mean something. Who can believe that they would let themselves be surprised in their hibernation like a bear? The people howl out, their fire has broken out over and over, but nothing helps. Fire, fire. Then, when all hesitate, the majoress herself takes an axe and breaks open the outer door. Then she rushes in alone up the stairs, throws open the door to the cavalier's wing, and roars out into the room, "Fire has broken out." This is a voice that finds better resonance in the cavalier's ears than the people's bellowing. Accustomed to obeying that voice, 12 men fall out of bed at once, see the firelight, pull on their clothes, and rush down the steps out into the yard. But in the entryway stands the large master smith and 2 sturdy mill hands, and great shame overtakes the cavaliers. All of them are seized as they come down, thrown down on the ground, and have their feet bound, whereupon they are carried with no further ado over to the conveyance that has been determined for each one of them. No one escaped. They were all captured. Berenkreutz, the stern colonel, was bound and carried away. Likewise Christian Berg, the strong captain, and Uncle Eberhard, the philosopher. Even the unconquerable, the terrible Gösta Berling was captured. The majoress has succeeded. She was still greater than all the cavaliers. They are deplorable to look at as they sit with bound limbs in the shabby old vehicles. There are hanging heads and angry looks, and the yard quakes with oaths and wild outbursts of impotent wrath. But the majoress goes from one to the other. "You must swear," she says, "never to come back to Aceby." "Watch it, troll hag." "You must swear," she says. "Otherwise it is I who will throw you into the cavalier's wing again, tied up as you are, and then you will burn up in there, for tonight I will burn down the cavalier's wing, just so you know it." "You wouldn't dare, majoress." "Wouldn't I dare? Isn't Aceby mine? Oh, you rogue, don't you think I remember how you spit after me on the road? Do you think I didn't have a desire just now to set this on fire and let all of you burn up inside? Did you lift a finger to defend me when I was driven from my home? No. Swear all you want." And the majoress stands there so dreadful, although perhaps she is pretending to be angrier than she is. And so many men, armed with axes, stand around her that they must swear to prevent a greater misfortune from occurring. Ah, she wants them to swear an oath never to come back to Aceby. So they do. Then the majoress has their clothes and cases fetched from the cavalier's wing, and loosens their bonds. Then the reins are put into their hands. But during all this, much time has passed, and Marianne has made her way down to her. The major was not a late sleeping gentleman. He was dressed when she arrived. She met him in the yard. He had been out taking breakfast to his bears. You remember he has pet bears at home. He did not say much in reply to her talk. He simply went into the bears, set a muzzle on them, led them out, and hurried away to Acabie. Marianne followed him at a distance. She was about to collapse from fatigue, but then she saw a bright firelight in the sky and was nearly frightened to death. What kind of night was this? A man beats his wife and lets his child freeze almost to death outside his door. Did a woman now intend to burn her enemies alive? Did the old major intend to let his bears loose on his people? Overcoming her fatigue, she hurried past the major and rushed up toward Acabie at a wild pace. She arrived well ahead of him. Once in the yard, she made her way through the crowd. When she stood in the middle of the circle, face to face with the majoress, she cried out as loud as she could, the major is coming with his bears." There was dismay among the people. All of their glances sought out the majoress. "You fetched him," she said to Marianne. "Flee," she cried out with increasing urgency. "Away, for God's sake. I don't know what the major is thinking of, but he has the bears with him." All stood quietly with eyes directed at the majoress. "I thank you for your help, children," she said calmly to the people. "All that has happened tonight has been arranged so that none of you can be taken to court or thereby come to grief. Go home now. I will not see any of my people murder or be murdered. Go now." The people, however, stood still. The majoress turned to Marianne. "I know that you are in love," she said. "You are acting in the madness of love. May the day never come when you must helplessly watch the devastation of your home. May you always be master of your tongue and your hand when anger fills your soul. Dear children, come now, come," she continued, turning towards the people. "May God now protect Acabie. I must go to my mother. Oh, Marianne, when you regain your senses, when Acabie is pillaged and the countryside sighs in distress, then think about what you have done tonight and take care of the people." With that, the majoress left, followed by all the people. When the major came up to the yard, he found no living thing there except Marianne and a long row of horses with vehicles and riders. A long, deplorable row where the horses were no worse off than the vehicle no worse off than the owner. They were all much the worse for wear in the battle of life. Marianne went over and released those who were tied up. She noticed how they bit their lips and looked away. They were ashamed like never before. Greater disgrace had never befallen them. "I wasn't any better off when I was on my knees on the stairway at Björne a few hours ago," said Marianne. And so, dear reader, what happened further that night, how the old conveyances got into the shed, the horses into the stable, and the cavaliers into the cavalier's wing, I will not try to relate. Dawn began to appear over the eastern hills, and day came with clarity and calm. How much calmer are bright sunlit days than dark nights, under whose sheltering wings the predator hunts and the owls hoot. This alone will I say, that when the cavaliers had once again come in and found a few drops in the last bowl to fill their glasses, a sudden enthusiasm came over them. "Skoll to the majoress," they cried out. She is a matchless woman, right? A woman without like. What more could they desire than to be allowed to serve her, to worship her? Isn't it awful that the devil took control of her and that the point of all her strivings is to send the cavaliers' souls to hell. Ooh, okay, that was chapter 7. That was chapter 7. So we will put the book down for now and come back later with the next installment of the Saga of Gösta Berling. Right? That must be Gösta Berling standing, looking over the landscape of Värmland with some storm clouds and so on above. Right? All right, bye for now.